Welcome, everybody. Hi, Roberta. Thank you for the call and response. Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the 2017 Dorothy Pearson Lecture in Equity and Social Justice. I'm Stephanie Robert. I'm the director of the School of Social Work, and I'm glad to see so many faces here today, particularly lots of students. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from our guest, Dr. Jerome Schiele. But first, it's going to be my pleasure to talk a little bit about Dorothy M. Pearson, who is winning the Distinguished Alumni Award from the school. Dr. Pearson was chosen by our Board of Visitors as the 2017 Distinguished Alumni winner. Unfortunately, Dr. Pearson was not able to join us today in person, but she has received a lovely plaque in the mail, and we're videotaping today so that she can watch. So greetings, Dr. Pearson. It's truly my honor to share with you just a few of Dr. Pearson's achievements, to celebrate her contributions to the field of social work, and to mark her place as a distinguished alumna of our school. Dr. Pearson, who earned her MSSW with us in 1960 and her Ph.D. in 1973, had a remarkable career in social work practice and education, and left an enduring mark on several institutions and with countless students, including our guest today, Dr. Schiele. Dr. Pearson began her career as a psychiatric social worker at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Center, became a social work educator at UW-Milwaukee, and spent 24 years on faculty at Howard University, where her leadership led to the creation of their doctoral social work program, which at the time was the only one in existence that served primarily students of color. Dr. Pearson was also a founding member of the Group for Advancement of Doctoral Education in Social Work. I've personally met many colleagues who were mentored by Dr. Pearson, and the stories that they have shared make it clear that she was and continues to be an extraordinary mentor. She's been recognized by Southern University, her undergraduate alma mater, with the Outstanding Alumnus Award. She was acknowledged by the Council on Social Work Education for her leadership in the establishment of the Carl A. Scott Memorial Fund. And in 1999, the National Association of Social Workers designated Dr. Pearson as a social work pioneer, and she certainly has been. To publicly honor her legacy at retirement, Howard University commissioned a portrait in her honor, which hangs on their campus today. Moreover, Dr. Pearson has supported our school very generously. During her visit, she has met with our students. This lecture series, which she created, is meant to be a place to come together to consider perspectives on the theme equality and social justice. Additionally, each year, one of our graduate students in need of financial assistance is awarded the Dorothy Pearson Graduate Fellowship. Dr. Pearson has also provided guidance to our school as an inaugural member of our Board of Visitors. As of this year, she's now our first emeritus board member of the Board of Visitors. Many of us in this room, at our school and nationally, are fortunate to call Dr. Pearson a friend and a colleague. For her many years of outstanding and dedicated service to the profession of social work and to our School of Social Work, let's all face the video camera and please join me in a round of hearty applause for Dr. Dorothy Pearson, winner of the 2017 Distinguished Alumni Award. Now I'm going to bring Jan Greenberg, Professor of Social Work, to the podium, and he will introduce our guest for today.
So thank you very much, Steph. This is a really special lecture for me. I think this is the fifth Dorothy Pearson lecture on equity and social justice. I was director of the school when we had our first lecture. To me, it's, it has deep meanings. It's a way to honor Dr. Pearson's contributions to the School of Social Work. It's a way to honor her contributions to social work as a profession. She literally, as her former Ph.D. students, has spurned dozens, or at least a dozen deans and associate deans across the country of social work. And also, she was writing about issues of equity and social justice in the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s. And she really shined a floodlight on these issues back then. She was here about 5 years ago and visited the campus here. And during that visit, we had lunch with a number of PhD students. And she talked about her journey as an African-American woman from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, back in the late 50s, up to Milwaukee at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we filmed that videotape. That videotape, to me personally, is a true inspiration. And I encourage you, we put it up onto YouTube. I encourage you to Google Dorothy Pearson and actually to watch that videotape in her own words. Dr. Schiele, as Steph said, was one of Dr. Pearson's students. He received his undergraduate degree from Hampton University in sociology. Then he went on to receive his master's degree in social work and his PhD from Howard University. He just recently stepped down for a 5-year term as the Dean of the College of Professional Studies at Bowie State University. Prior to this position, he was the Associate Dean at the University of Georgia and also held positions at other schools of social work in the country. Dr. Schiele's CV is very long. When I was printing it out this morning, I ran out of paper and I had to reload the paper into my printer. But he's written 3 books. One of the books is on social welfare policy, which is a widely read book in the curriculums in social work. He has approximately 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, and he's written extensively about the Afrocentric paradigm in social work, cultural oppression, and the high-risk status of African Americans, and the continuing significance of race in our society. It is an honor today to have Dr. Schiele join us. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good afternoon again. Look, I want to thank you for your hospitality here in the Midwest. We're not so hospitable in the East Coast. Everybody's so rushed and they have their blinders on. I don't know what that's about. But you all are very friendly, and I appreciate it 100%. Thank you, Jan. You've been a great host. You're OCD like me, and that's a good thing. You have to be as an administrator. But I thank you very much for the invitation, and I just want to kind of move forward and also give my own personal tribute to Dr. Pearson. I met Dr. Pearson in 1983, and she taught me both in the master's program and in the doctoral program in social work. And she was the main reason why I decided to go on and pursue my doctorate. At that point, I had a job right out of graduate school from my internship. And my parents supported me throughout my 4 years as an undergraduate and the 2 years of my MSW program. And I really didn't want to burden them anymore. So I went to Dr. Pearson, and she was trying to recruit me into the program. And I said, Dr. Pearson, I just can't do that to my parents. Although I wanted to continue to go to school. And then she said, well, you know, Jerome, we have a lot of mental health money from the National Institute of Mental Health. And she said, we can fund your education. And I said, hallelujah, I'm on board. But she really encouraged me, and I consider her to be a trailblazer. And part of that generation, and I don't want to discuss age, but obviously a more seasoned group of people, of African Americans who pursued their graduate degrees, particularly at the Big Ten schools like Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio State, Minnesota, Indiana University. About a third of the faculty, maybe 40% of the faculty at Howard when I was there, attended the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so that's a tribute to the University of Wisconsin. Our current president, who just stepped down from Bowie State University, Dr. Mickey Burnham, completed his Ph.D. here in economics back in the 1970s. So you all have a great legacy, and you've produced a lot of important people, and personally, a very important person in that Dr. Dorothy Pearson was the one that shaped my career. Thank you very much, Dr. Pearson, and we wish you were here personally. As Jan said, a lot of my research has been in the area of oppression, and I'm very interested in oppression. I want to reduce it, I want to eliminate it, I want to study it, and I'm interested in different forms. And of course, we know oppression is a major social problem. It's a major social injustice that affects so many people. And it's not only about producing humiliation and harm, but also, and as we talk about later, I'll cite a feminist scholar by the name of Iris Young, but it really basically restricts the individual's positive potential and capacity. And that's really the harm of oppression, because there's inequality in the capacity, the expression of the capacity of the individual. And that's one thing that we need to focus on a little bit more. Of course, over the years, there have been a lot of efforts to address oppression and to reduce it in this country, in the United States, starting from the Revolution and the colonial period. I know many of you probably have used Mimi Abramovitz's Regulating the Lives of Women, and she talks about colonial family ethic and patriarchy, and of course the slavery, the abolitionist movement. But particularly over the last 50 years, we've seen an increase in the attention given to oppression, and partly because of the successes of the modern day civil rights movement, particularly of the 1950s and 60s. And of course, icons like Dr. King and others were very pivotal in that regard. Now, this activism mostly has come from the left, but it also, there are many people on the political right who have underscored oppression as well, and they suggest that political correctness has generated a form of restriction of free speech and free association, and that is given special attention and privileges to others to the detriment of, for some, to the detriment of others. And perhaps we can talk a little bit more about the rise of the political right and the activism of the political right. I know that you all had a lot of activism here a couple of years ago with your governor, and of course the recent activities in Charlottesville, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Charlottesville incident, which really was a very sad chapter in contemporary American history. So basically, we can talk a little bit more about that. My point is that the activism mostly comes from the left, but the right is taking a page from the left, and they're moving in the same direction in many ways and making some of the same claims that the political left has made for such a long time. In social work education, this focus on oppression has heavily emphasized diversity and multiculturalism. And there's a great article that was published some time back that traces the evolution of social work's response to diversity and multiculturalism by identifying 5 trends. And I wanted to kind of go over those 5 trends before we move into a more substantive discussion. They talk about the pre-wave period, which is preceding 1965. And in this period, basically, there was, according to Spencer and others, there was really no attention given to cultural inclusion and cultural relativity. The focus really was on ethnocentrism, and that social work practice should be culturally universal. So they referred to that as the pre-wave period preceding 1965. Then they discussed wave one, 1965 to 1974, and here the attention was given to race and ethnicity, and that's partly because, too, of the civil rights movement. Much of the attention was given to the experiences of African Americans and other racial minorities. So race became a very significant variable. And of course, Dr. Pearson was in graduate school during this time, and she finished her doctorate in 1973. Then we have wave two, 1975 to 1984. And in addition to race, now we begin to see, according to Spencer and others, gender issues were included to the earlier themes. And then also there's a focus on feminist practice issues. A lot of information was coming out in the 70s and 80s on that. And then during this time too, the commissions on people of color and women within the CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education, were established. Then we have wave three, 1985 to 1995. Sexual orientation and gender identity were included, and of course increased attention was added or given to homophobia, heterosexism, and other issues related to sexual orientation. Also, the Commission on GLBT, which it was called then, now LGBT issues emerged as well. Wave four is what they consider to be the last wave, and that's from 1995 to the present. And besides attention to the previous groups, issues related to disabilities and social class were also included. And of course, a lot of attention since 1995 has been given to, and I'm sure you're familiar with the concept, intersectionality and multiple identities. Now, what we can glean from these waves and the broader trends, too, is that this activism has sought to do two things, I believe. A, it definitely has challenged the dominance of race and racism as the primary sources of oppression. And then B, it's challenged the notion of the singularity of oppression by offering conceptions that basically give us a more fluid, multiple, and intersectional understanding of oppression. And also how oppression can also be interlocked and interchanged with privilege. We can be both privileged and oppressed at the same time. I often speak about growing up in Virginia as an African American. Clearly I was racially oppressed, but because my father was a prominent minister in the area, when I applied to college, all he did was call the president of the local university, and I was able to get in. So basically the application was perfunctory. And so I was privileged because of my father's social status, but of course simultaneously humiliated and oppressed in those days because of my racial status. So this notion of the kind of simultaneous experience of privilege and oppression really is a very important one, and I think it's one that we should acknowledge and continue to think more about. So these notions really come out of what we know now as the postmodernism movement, and of course that's very, very popular in academia today among faculty and also students. Now, here's where we get to the meat of the presentation. I think there are many strengths of this increased emphasis on oppression. And clearly, more groups and their subjugation have been acknowledged. And then, of course, it also broadens the platform through which we can oppose inequality and social injustice. However, a downside to this increased involvement in activism is what I call, and I consider the social justice dilemma, is what I've called earlier the equality of oppressions paradigm, and now I just simply refer to it as the equal oppressions paradigm. And as we see here in the PowerPoint, the equal oppression paradigm basically assumes that every source of oppression is equal to the others in its severity, frequency, and production of human subjugation and degradation. No one form of oppression is considered to be better than the others because they all are seen as a necessary and component parts of the whole system of domination, or what some people refer to as a superstructure of domination. And so they have similar causes and manifestations and consequences, and therefore because of that, they are all equal in their severity, frequency, and production of human degradation. Now, additionally, one of the dilemmas, too, of the equality of oppressions paradigm is that it does not acknowledge, at least it denies, it may suppress, it may de-emphasize the existence of differential vulnerability. And of course, this is a very important concept that mostly comes out of the public health literature, but essentially it just says that all human beings are vulnerable if we are human. But clearly, some are more at risk than others. And therefore, this is a major problem with the equality of oppressions paradigm, is that it tends to either deny or de-emphasize the existence of differential vulnerability. So therefore, by doing this, I think that we essentially are not relying on an evidence-based approach to actually determine differential vulnerability. In fact, we're using or relying what Gambrell's called an authority-based model, which means that essentially we're relying heavily on our opinions and traditions and popularity to determine differential vulnerability among oppressed groups. But we're not being evidence-based because oppression is very emotional, it's very personal, and therefore it's difficult sometimes for people to come out of their own emotions to kind of systematically evaluate the degree to which their oppression, is different or similar to someone else's or another group's. And so the evidence-based approach is very, very important, I think, for us to consider. And the equality of oppressions paradigm does not do that. Indeed, it denies and de-emphasizes. So if we're going to move forward with an evidence-based approach to determining differential vulnerability, then what model should we use? What criteria should we use? Well, there's a political philosopher and feminist scholar at the University of Chicago by the name of Dr. Iris Young. And Dr. Iris Young wrote a very similar book back in 1991, and there have been a couple of revisions, but it's entitled Justice and the Politics of Difference. And I encourage everyone to get a copy of it. It's a great critique of the political economy, and she also critiques some of the prominent notions of social justice. But she has a wonderful chapter in the book that is entitled The 5 Faces of Oppression. And she discusses the 5 faces of oppression as not only attributes or characteristics of oppression, but also she suggests that we can use those 5 faces as criteria to determine differential vulnerability, that is, the degree of oppression or vulnerability a group might confront. And I've been using this model for a long time. Every time I get a chance, I cite Dr. Young because I like this model, and I think it can help us move forward to a more evidence-based model of determining vulnerability. Here are the 5 faces: exploitation, marginalization, powerlessness, cultural imperialism, which is the one I'm most concerned about, and then, of course, violence. The first 3, exploitation, powerlessness, and marginalization, deal with one's relationship to the economy and to the labor market. And therefore, exploitation, defined by Young, is a kind of neo-Marxist definition, but it's the process through which the capitalist class or group controls both the conditions and consequences of labor to produce significant material inequality. So for Young, anyone who's employed or who's not a member of that corporate capitalist elite, she would say, is deemed exploited. Then we have marginalization. And here Young talks about a group she refers to as marginals. And these are people who lack the opportunity or the skills and training to really participate in the labor market. These are people who just don't have that opportunity, or they've been blocked from those opportunities, and so they don't have the kind of education and training to sustain employment. Examples of this would be, and this is coming from Young, the non-working poor, those who are severely disabled due to an illness, prenatal or developmental dysfunctions, and then those who are extremely and persistently stigmatized. Those would be, for her, the marginals. Then we go to the third phase, and that's powerlessness. And essentially, she describes this as the sort of liabilities and burdens that are endured by non-professionals, that is, people who don't have a college degree or advanced training, the so-called working class. I grew up in a working class community. And so non-professionals have less power in the workplace than professionals because they have less autonomy, they earn less money, and they receive less societal prestige than professionals. And often, too, professionals manage or supervise non-professionals. So she refers to that group as powerlessness. So the fourth phase of oppression is cultural imperialism, or what some people call or refer to as cultural oppression. And this is the one that I'm most interested in because it's very broad and it covers a lot of groups. Essentially, it's the inequality in the affirmation of human values, experiences, and interpretations. And essentially, it acknowledges the notion that some groups just have more power in determining which values, experiences, and interpretations are valid. Of course, these groups have the power, and this is very important, to not only impose, but to universalize those experiences and interpretations, especially on those who are considered culturally different, deviant, inferior, or uncivilized. And we can give many examples of this, racial examples, religious examples, et cetera, et cetera. The last face is the face of violence. And here Young is talking about physical harm and abuse, and she speaks to examples of hate crimes and sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, but also she refers to lesser degrees of violence, what we generally might call microaggressions, and again, harassment, intimidation, and ridicule. So these are the 5 faces of oppression that we offer, and she offers as 5 criteria to determine a group's differential vulnerability. So therefore, she goes on in the chapter to suggest that if a group is experiencing all 5 faces, then of course they would be more vulnerable than a group that would experience 1 or 2 of those faces. And she gives several examples of that, and we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A. But she really offers this as an evidence-based model to determine those who are more at risk of experiencing domination and subjugation. So let's talk about one limitation of this model, and there probably are others. But clearly, if we're not careful, this kind of model can lead some to engage in a kind of competition against different forms of oppression, And people might say, well, hey, my oppression is more stronger and more intense than yours. And that could lead to a kind of shutdown in intergroup participation and dialogue and collaboration. And that clearly is not what the Five Faces paradigm or model is about. It clearly is about just saying we need to be more evidence-based in terms of prioritizing the groups that we need to really focus on in terms of our efforts to fight against social and political and economic injustice. And then finally, I just have some broad implications for social work practice and education. Of course, if the Five Faces model could be used among practitioners to more effectively identify, develop, and implement methods that target groups who are most or more vulnerable. And of course, we could do the same thing here too at the level of policy, practice, and advocacy. I think also in terms of social work education, particularly for MSW students, where you're supposed to be experiencing advanced education compared to generalist education, then this kind of approach can give students and give professors more knowledge, values, and skills to delve in more detail about issues related to oppression. And then finally, doctoral students can develop more research questions that can help us to more effectively tease out some of the issues around oppression, particularly around differential vulnerability. I'm just going to stop there so that we can have enough time to do a Q&A. I don't know what time it is, but I hope we have enough time. And then lastly, we have the references here. And again, I strongly encourage you to look at Dr. Young's Justice and the Politics of Difference. It's a great book. She's coming from a feminist approach, but she's expanding it to critique the whole system of social injustice. I thank you for your time and attention. So now we can have a Q&A. Any questions, comments? I think Dr. Pearson used to say this. Any questions, comments, remarks, or observations? Or others? Anybody? Who has consistently and persistently experienced recently some harm and humiliation based on your gender, based on your race, your religious status, your sexual orientation, gender identity recently? I mean, over the last couple of weeks. Who's really been pissed off? Okay, you in the back. You raise your hand. What's your name? Stand up. What's your name?
My name's Allie.
Allie, tell me about what's been going on.
I'm just thinking about my gender and things that I hear in the news and things that happen to women every day and whatnot.
Okay. And what are you doing about that?
I talk about it with my friends a lot. It's a topic of discussion I think everyone should think about. Yeah, I'm taking classes on it, learning more. Yeah.
Are you involved politically?
Here and there.
Okay. All right. Well, clearly Dr. Young would say patriarchy is a major form of societal injustice. And she would probably say that it would fit in a lot of those spaces, but of course it would depend on the social class of the woman as well. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, over here.
It's more of like a story.
And your name?
My name is Kylie.
Kylie, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
So I was at a Subway, and the girl working was like, "Am I crabby?" And I was like, "I don't know. Are you? Like, you seem fine to me." And she's like, "Well, people that ask me if I'm crabby, I'm like, girl, I'm crabby every day." And then her boss came up, and he was like, I think that's he's like, no offense, but I think that's a woman problem. And I was like, when people say no offense, it's typically followed by something that's very offensive.
That's true.
It made him very uncomfortable, but the girl was like, oh my God, thank you for saying that. So, and you know, that's just a small example of just, you know, and then I think what he wanted was for me to giggle, you know, he didn't expect me to actually voice my feelings on it. It's hard as a woman to voice my feelings when a man walks up and says, oh, why don't you smile, you know? I said, why don't you put on a smile, you know? And that's just
And
like,
put on some lipstick too.
yeah, I mean, I like wearing lipstick, but
Yes.
it's just everyday oppression. Like, we're expected to be pleasant and pretty and smile, and most days I don't feel like that.
Right,
So,
right.
Thank you. So it's one of those things.
And that's a good thing, that's a good point, because oftentimes, really, oppression becomes orthodoxy and tradition. And really, the tendency for human beings is really to conform. When my parents were married in 1952, they lived in Richmond, Virginia. And if you know a little bit about your American history, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. And in the days when my parents were married, Richmond was very segregated. And I would ask my mom, I said, Mom, you know, what did you think about that when you could go to the department store and you couldn't try on clothes? When you went to the movie, you had to sit up on in the balcony. And I said, Mom, did you all think about it? And I mean, were you angry about it? And she said, you know, it was just a way of life. And see, that is the harm, when it becomes just a way of life. And when you consider it just as a way of life, then that's the problem. Then you are trapped. So you have to view it as not a way of life, and therefore you have to engage in essentially nonconformity. And that's difficult to do because we've been so programmed since day one to conform to certain practices, values, and notions about who and what we are as human beings. And therefore, that's one of the major steps to being a social justice advocate, is really critiquing yourself and moving down the road of nonconformity in this regard. Thank you for that example. Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi, my name's Eric.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for talking about the limitation of the model. I think the model is really helpful to equal oppression. Then my question is, so the limitation that he references is tendency of competitiveness and like axis of oppression. And I see this a lot, and I see more calling out and calling in, you know, and less intergroup dialogue and actually meaningful connection. So what would you say, how do we go about kind of getting over that barrier, that limitation of the model?
Well, I think that basically the model, I mean, it is a limitation, but I think that we also have to be fair in our assessment of things. I do think that we have to prioritize, and I do think we have to apply those evidence-based models. With that said, you can still engage in intergroup participation within the Five Faces model. Indeed, is that a sign? Is that a fire drill? Oh, wow. Oh my God. I've never had this happen.
Attention. The building fire alarm has been activated.
Wow.
All occupants must evacuate the building.
Oh my
The
God.
elevators.
Religious issues. And increasingly in social work education, what I've seen is really the tension between the LGBTQ community and religious conservatives. I've seen that in the classroom. There's a lot that's being written on that now. You can Google a guy by the name of David Hodge who writes about that. But there's major tension in that as well. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But I hope that at least responded to your query. Began to. Yes?
I have a question just in that. You said that you would give us an example of how you would use this model.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, well, I think this is examples that Iris Young uses, for example. If let's say you're the director of a major public health or social service agency, and you do have limited resources, although you should always advocate for more resources, then I think you can use this model, the 5 Faces approach, to target those who are most vulnerable. And now Young gives some specific examples. And generally she comes down on, this is where she comes down. She says that basically people of color, women, and the poor are most at risk. And again, it's the intersectionality of all of that. But I think that's one way we can do it. We all engage in strategic planning. We're supposed to, at least. Sometimes we engage in it and then we just kind of toss the paper on the desk on the shelf. But strategic planning really requires us to identify goals so that we can prioritize our resources. And I think this is one of the ways that we can use, one of the models that we can use to prioritize the goals related to helping people. But again, it doesn't mean that you don't address the concerns of others. It just means that you have to prioritize those who are based on evidence. And of course, we need to ask the question, whose evidence, what method? But we can talk about that as well. But essentially, we want to make sure that we're not just relying heavily on opinions and authority and orthodoxy and popularity. Did that answer your question? Yes. Okay, I'm not trying to be evasive. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question pertaining to what would be your suggestion if, for example, in going through the dynamics, we find that there happens to be a group who we would consider to be privileged, who come out on, according to this theory, not to be. Actually, we were having a discussion earlier. I was asking about black male privilege. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, if black male privilege is something that simply because I'm a male, we have to be the worst patriarchs in the history of the world. The number 1 most incarcerated, number 2 most shot by police officers other than by our Native American brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. We are the most discriminated against in employment, housing, mm-hmm. Certain public accommodations, talk to State Street. Mm-hmm. And so my question then became, what would happen if we were to put that data into the 5 Faces of Oppression, and it would say, out of all these folks, African American males are number 2 for most vulnerable. Would that speak against in any way, shape, or form the established ideals of patriarchy?
Well, that's an interesting point, because some people argue that racism has diminished the ability of some men of color to exercise full patriarchy. But on the other hand, if you go with the face of violence, you see, although let's say the black male or the Latino male is down and out, there's still this issue of violence, and that person could inflict violence or harm. Now, if you talk about systematic patriarchy, then that would be, of course, essentially more white and male, and particularly white male who have education and higher incomes and that kind of thing. So I think it's really very complex, because some people suggest that, some people say people of color can't be racist. Well, they say that because they say, people of color really are not in the halls of power to make those kind of decisions. So they could be individually racist, but what about advancing and promoting systematic racism? So I think we have to look at individual racism or individual patriarchy versus systematic patriarchy. And so who's really able to exercise full patriarchy, you see, in terms of the various forms of patriarchy. But patriarchy, nonetheless, in terms of violence, that same man who's down and out, been shot, et cetera, could exercise violence for sure. And in fact, a lot of research shows this is really a major reason why they exercise violence, because essentially they feel so humiliated themselves, and so of course they kick the can, or they attack the person that's least threatening to them. There's a lot of literature in the feminist literature that speaks to that as well. But it's a very complex thing. I think we have to separate what systematic forms of oppression and a person being able to exercise systematic forms of oppression versus a person who's able just to exercise individual forms of oppression, like calling you the N-word, or the Jews will not replace me in Charlottesville. But see, that's a systematic movement, though, if you're talking about the so-called white Aryan nation, et cetera, Yeah. I didn't mean to be evasive. Was I evasive?
No.
Okay. Yes.
When it comes to the 5 faces paragraph, is there a way to further quantify the oppression that groups face, or is it simply 1 through 5? I'm just wondering, looking at data, trying to make choices for allocating resources, what do you groups that are both
Yeah, well, there's a lot of data. We have a lot of data on, for example, violence and hate crimes. We have a lot of data on the issues with the working class and the working poor. We have a lot of data on the marginals, the non-working poor. So we have a lot of data on those 3. The exploitation piece was a broader critique, because Iris Young was I guess we could categorize her as a kind of socialist feminist, and so that was kind of a broader critique. But you could look at income data. For example, inequality has increased over the last 10, 20, 30 years, and so she would say that's evidence for a greater exploitation. So we have data, but we need to do more research in this regard. I'm just laying out the conceptual model, but I do think we need to do more quantitative research, even though we have a lot of the government data to support a lot of what she says. Now, somebody asked me a question about her research method, and she was really more of yes, your name again? Cheryl. Yeah, she engaged more in qualitative research. And then, of course, she also was a theorist. And so her method was examining broader concepts, but her method was more of a qualitative approach. But I do think we do need more data, but we already have a lot of data on violence, on the non-working poor, the working poor, and of course a lot of information on racism and sexism. But we still need more. Are you a doctoral student? Okay, are you thinking about a doctorate? Come on, think about it. You can say you can think about it. The way you decide on it, that's a whole nother thing. Right, I got fun. That's the reason why. Thank you, Dr. Pearson, again for that funding. I have to thank her. But I think we always need more data from my vantage point. But we have a lot of information on at least 3 of those, maybe 4 of those faces, I believe. Hold on, in the back, have you asked the question? Yes. Your name?
Dave.
Dave, how you doing, Dave? Like your beard, man.
So there's a pretty clear tendency in social justice to kind of focus on issues that are personal to the individual. It's the loudest voices in race issues are going to be people of color. The loudest voices in feminism are generally going to be women. Is there kind of an individual responsibility to focus on what is more or less objectively the greatest forms of oppression, or is that more of a systemic level thing, that focusing on what you most personally identify with is just fine?
Well, that's a good question. Whether one should focus on what they're personally experiencing, or we have a social obligation to focus on forms of oppression that don't necessarily affect us. And I think that what you saw in Charlottesville, for example, is a great example of the latter. Most of the people protesting out there against the right were young whites. Let me just say that again. Most of the people out there protesting were young whites. And they have understood that racism, reducing and ending racism, is in their self-interest as well. And so, as Dr. King used to say, it's not a choice between violence and nonviolence, it's a choice between non-existence and nonviolence. And so basically, we have to, I think, identify with people and other forms of oppression that don't necessarily personally affect us, but in order to have oppression, there must be the flip side of it, which is what? The P word, privilege. And people are becoming conscious about privilege. In fact, there's a major white privilege conference that goes on annual, and I wish I could remember the guy who sponsors it, but yes, Eddie Moore. Yes, I met him a couple of years ago. And most of the people who come to the conference are not people of color. There are white people, non-Hispanic whites. And I think that that's an obligation. I think as a man, it's an obligation to address issues of patriarchy, because the flip side of it is that I benefit from it in some kind of way. And so that's a very good question. But I think if we're into and really want to reinforce social responsibility, we have to transcend our own personal self-interest, although it's all about personal self-interest, because the flip side of oppression is privilege. Someone always benefits when somebody is not benefiting. Yeah, that's a very good question. Are you a doctoral student? Uh-huh. That beard looks like all you need the glasses and the pipe, and you got it going on. Yes, yes, dean, director. I'm sorry, I didn't put the dean on you. I'm sorry.
How does this approach help us better understand some of the common root causes of oppression so that we can address it?
Well, I really didn't do Iris Young justice, but most of the book is really about addressing those root causes, which she sees it kind of like a cross between the political economy and what people called back in the day cultural Marxism. So it's kind of the confluence of how does capitalism reinforce cultures, a culture of commercialization, consumerism, and she gets into a lot of that. But she also talks about the objectification of human beings, and she gets into a deep philosophical discussion about that and where that comes from, and she takes it back to Plato's The Republic, and she gets into a whole analysis of that and how the object and the subject are separated. Again, she's a political philosopher. But she does go into some of those root causes, which she says comes out of the values of objectivity, and then also this confluence of the political economy with cultural Marxism, because she really came out of that approach herself. So therefore, she would say what we need is really a systems overhaul, and particularly in terms of how we think about each other in relationship to power. Any other questions? Yes.
What role does, so I feel like I work in a system that it's built by white folks, it's largely carried out by white folks, and it is oppressive, like in the way that it operates. And there's some necessity for that, and there's also a lot to be questioned about it. But I always wonder where the voices of the families or working folks come into this, because I see them as being like hitting all of your categories of like pretty much the most oppressed. But I also feel like as whether it's public health or whether it's social work, we kind of continue to churn along, largely not incorporating the voices and the lived experience in the policy.
Well, we definitely need to do more of that.
How do we like that? what is the suggestion with that, to move that?
Well, there's an approach. Are you a student?
No.
Uh-huh. In social work, there's an approach called the strengths perspective. And part of it from a social policy standpoint is to engage our clients in helping us to formulate and to develop social policies. We also see that in kind of participatory research, where we engage the community that we're about to study, and we say, hey, we want your ideas on how to develop this questionnaire. Here's some of the research questions. Do you think they're appropriate? Do you think the language is appropriate? So that same kind of approach, that strengths perspective, can also extend into social work practice at the micro and the macro level. So it's called the strengths perspective. And people do it, we don't do it enough. And of course, we really have to organize the communities themselves. Community organization is a great skill. Of course, President Obama was a community organizer in Chicago. And so we have to really help the people that we're serving to better organize themselves so that they can serve as a voice of empowerment. But that approach is called the strengths perspective, and it was advanced by a professor out of the University of Kansas by the name of Dennis Schiele. Okay?
So Dr. Schiele, we're going to bring this part of the program to a
Okay.
close because we have food right outside.
Okay, good.
And it's going to get cold, so we want everybody to go outside and grab something to eat. Dr. Schiele will be joining us at the reception, so if you want to ask him individual questions, he'll be available too. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is wonderful. I've never been interrupted, though, by a fire alarm. That's a first. A fire alarm. That's a first. A fire alarm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.